Introduction. About me and my family. My name is Emily Turner, and as I look back on the 34 years of my life, I can say with some certainty that nothing ever went quite the way I planned. And yet, until recently, I believed I had built the perfect little world for myself. I grew up in Wellesley, a leafy suburb just outside of Boston, a place famous for its white picket fences, quiet tree-lined streets, and close-knit sense of community. My parents, Beth and Warren Turner, instilled in me a love for beauty in simplicity, and above all else, the value of loyalty. Our home, a charming colonial house with navy shutters and a wide, welcoming porch, was a safe haven filled with laughter, Saturday night family movies, and the comforting smell of homemade apple pie wafting through the kitchen on chilly autumn days. When I lost my father to cancer 10 years ago, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. My mother and I leaned on each other, and together we did our best to keep the house and our lives intact. It was during those years, in my senior year of college at the Rhode Island School of Design, that I met Michelle Harper. She was everything I wasn't: bold, outspoken, adventurous. We bonded instantly, sitting up late at night in our tiny dorm room, confessing our big dreams and little fears over boxes of pizza. It never occurred to me then that the girl who became the sister I never had would, one day, become central to my greatest heartbreak. Design has always been my passion, a kind of language I speak through color palettes, textures, and the careful arrangement of space. After college, I landed a junior role at a boutique interior design firm in Boston, working my way up to lead designer in just 4 years. That's when I first met Jack Sullivan. Even now, I remember the first time he walked into that glossy lobby, tall, with an easy confidence and a smile that made you feel instantly at ease. Jack was already a successful attorney, climbing the ladder at a prestigious firm downtown. Our connection was immediate, built on equal parts admiration and comfort, late-night conversations, and a shared appreciation for dark coffee and classic jazz records. We married in a spring ceremony at my family's home. I can still see the soft petals of the cherry blossoms drifting through the air as we exchanged our vows on the porch where I grew up. For 6 years, I truly believed we were building a beautiful life together. My career was thriving, Jack's work kept us comfortable, and I felt deeply grateful for a partnership where we encouraged one another's ambitions and celebrated each other's wins. Michelle, still my closest confidant, was a constant presence, joining us for holidays, birthdays, and plain old Wednesday night takeout. Our home in Brookline was my dream made real. Sunlit rooms, walls lined with books and framed memories, a sprawling backyard for summer barbecues, and the distinctive, hand-painted sign that read, Turner and Sullivan, a daily reminder of what I thought we'd built together. Looking from the outside in, anyone would have said we had it all: love, stability, family, and a future brimming with possibility. But sometimes, the life you design with such care begins to show cracks where you least expect. Hairline fractures running just beneath the surface, invisible, until one day the light catches them just so. All these memories, both bright and bittersweet, are my inheritance. They color the way I see the world, and they're the reason I fought as hard as I did when everything I thought was certain began slowly, then all at once, to unravel. Signs of trouble. If I close my eyes, I can pinpoint when that thin, invisible thread between Jack and me began to fray. It wasn't sudden. It was the slow, almost imperceptible accumulation of silences and sidelong glances, of unanswered questions and half-hearted replies. Looking back, The signs were everywhere. But when you live inside the cocoon of marriage, it's easy to tell yourself stories that make the cracks seem like quirks. The distance, like a passing mood. It started with the little things. Jack, who once never failed to call if he'd be late, began working longer hours without warning. He'd come home past dark, his tie loosening as he stepped inside. The weight of the day etched deeper on his brow than I'd ever seen. I would greet him at the door with a gentle kiss, but his responses became distracted, his mind somewhere else. He'd mutter something about a big case or a difficult client and disappear into his study, the door closing with a quiet finality that stung. The routines we'd cherished, our evening walks with coffee in hand, our habit of sharing a record before bed, soon started to slip through the cracks. One night, I set the table with his favorite meal, hoping to spark conversation, only to find him glued to his phone beneath the table, tapping out messages with a secretive half smile. When I gently asked if he was texting a colleague, his answer came a beat too late, and somehow a little too defensive. At the same time, Michelle's visits began to take on a strange regularity. She had always been welcome in our home, her laughter brightening any room, her stories making even Jack crack a smile after the hardest days. But suddenly, she was arriving unannounced, arms full of pastries from our favorite bakery, a bottle of wine for old times' sake. I noticed a new ease between her and Jack, a playful banter that once belonged only to us. Sometimes, I'd find them deep in conversation, their voices hushed when I entered. Michelle would flash me her usual grin, but there was flicker in her eyes, a silent question I couldn't quite read. I tried to brush it off, told myself I was overthinking, that the world felt heavier for everyone lately. I buried my suspicions in work, in design projects that required my full creative energy. But the worry gnawed at me in quiet moments. When I found 2 coffee mugs in the sink after Michelle left, even when she swore she hadn't stayed long. Or how both of them slipped out for errands at the same time, returning separately an hour later, claiming coincidence. Night after night, I found myself wide awake, staring at the ceiling, piecing together tiny, jagged clues. A missed anniversary dinner, a scarf that didn't belong to me draped over the couch, the scent of Jack's cologne on Michelle's jacket. My heart wanted desperately to believe in the people I loved, but something in me, a small voice I couldn't silence, kept whispering that I needed to pay closer attention, that behind the surface calm, a storm was quietly gathering, waiting for the moment to break. And so, for the first time since our wedding, I found myself no longer certain of the life I'd built. The walls I had decorated with snapshots of our love now seemed to echo with my doubts, casting long, unfamiliar shadows. The shocking discovery. Looking back, there was no single day, no dramatic thunderclap of realization. The truth crept toward me quietly, like a tide inching over the sand, soaking everything I thought I knew. Still, there was one night, the night everything shifted forever, that I cannot forget. It was a rainy Thursday, one of those raw, gray Boston evenings, when the sky feels impossibly low, and the city lights shimmer in shallow puddles. Jack had texted he'd be late, again, citing a deposition running long. I tried to believe him. I pulled a blanket to my chin on the couch, flicked through a design magazine, and watched the clock tick past 8, past 9. Each minute seemed slower than the last. Michelle, for once, hadn't dropped by. Her absence felt heavier than her presence. It was strange how even the silence seemed tainted now, carrying the echo of laughter behind closed doors. I imagined them somewhere, perhaps in some cozy corner of a bar, discussing things I'd never hear, building a world outside my own. To distract myself, I tidied up Jack's study, the one room I usually left untouched, respecting his space. But the disarray grated on my nerves that night. Files half open, sticky notes everywhere, the blue glow of his laptop screen still awake. Out of habit, I nudged the touchpad to put it to sleep, and as I did, the screen brightened to a new message notification, a name that needed no introduction, Michelle Harper. For a moment, I hovered, my conscience wrestling with curiosity in the boundaries of trust. Hadn't I always promised I wouldn't snoop, no matter what? But then, I remembered every time Jack left the room when Michelle called, every half-swallowed excuse, every unfinished sentence. My heartbeat thundered. I clicked, and there it was, a recent thread of messages, the digital equivalent of a whispered conversation in the dark. The words on the screen froze me. I scrolled, half hoping my eyes deceived me, that it was some inside joke I didn't understand. But each message was a needle, puncturing my faith in them. Plans to meet in secret, playful banter morphing into unmistakable intimacy, veiled mentions of the paperwork, always circling back to the house, my childhood home that meant everything to me. I sat in Jack's desk chair, numb, as the storm outside lashed against the window. My hands shook, not from cold, but from the sickening disconnect between what I was reading and the people I loved most in the world. A ping startled me, another message right before my eyes. My father's portrait on the nearby shelf watched me, half hidden by piles of legal folders. I thought of all he had worked for, all the dinners on that porch, the holiday mornings by the fireplace, the way my mother still talked to him sometimes, as if he were just out gardening. Our house was more than property. It was memory, sanctuary, root. In that moment, righteous anger flared, hot, unfamiliar, and pure, but it was layered with pain so sharp it felt physical. I pressed my palm against my chest, trying to steady my breath, to keep the tears from coming. For years, I'd believed I was building a fortress, solid, safe. Suddenly, it felt like a sandcastle, doomed against the rising tide. As the minutes ticked by, I opened more messages, searching for doubt, for anything that might prove I was wrong. But everything pointed to the same conclusion. Jack and Michelle, my husband and my oldest friend, conspiring against me, both for love and, unbelievably, money. Every detail landed heavier than the last. I tried to picture their faces, Jack's comforting smile, Michelle's easy laugh, and suddenly they seemed alien, strangers cloaked in the skins of people I thought I knew. I rocked slightly in the creaking chair, feeling all at once abandoned, humiliated, angry, and above all, alone. For hours, I sat there. I copied screenshots of the messages, saving them into a hidden thumb drive. My mind churned in slow, disbelieving circles. Every memory between the three of us replayed with new, darker lines. The late-night calls, Michelle's insistence on wine after I'd gone to bed, Jack's new cologne, Michelle's favorite, not mine. Each puzzle piece fitted too well. I thought about confrontation, storm into the rain, confront Jack at the door, or call Michelle then and there. But something inside me snapped toward caution. Why give them warning? Why not let them think, for just a little while longer, that I was still naively devoted? It hurt, but it would give me time. Time to gather not only the strength, but the evidence. I shut down Jack's laptop with trembling hands. I straightened his papers, leaving everything as I'd found it. Outside, the city felt impossibly large and impersonal, a place of secrets, of hidden betrayals, and desperate acts. I walked back to our bedroom, past the walls I had painted by hand, past the wedding photo where Jack held my waist, and Michelle grinned next to us, her arm flung proudly around my shoulders. I crawled into bed and pulled the comforter over me, letting the tears come at last. I cried for lost illusions, for the woman I had been the day before, for the world that no longer made sense. My body shook in the dark, then slowly stilled as anger and resolve eclipsed grief. Somewhere, below all the pain, a new voice began whispering, a voice I barely recognized as mine, quiet and determined and cold. I realized I still had choices. They had underestimated me, perhaps always had. But that would end now. As the storm rolled out over the city, and the first hint of morning light crept through the blinds, I made a silent promise. If they wanted a game, I would play. Smarter, colder, and with the careful patience of a woman who has nothing left to lose. Let them believe another day in their fiction. Tomorrow, I would begin the work of dismantling their web, one calculated thread at a time. For the first time since saying, "I do," I fell asleep knowing exactly what I needed to do. The truth had broken me open. Now, it would make me stronger. The plot to take everything. Some betrayals end with heartbreak, others with ruin. What I uncovered next left me fighting for so much more than my pride or even my marriage. It was a battle for the very ground beneath my feet, for the home that had defined me long before Jack or Michelle ever entered my world. After the night I discovered the messages, the world looked different. It was as if I'd wiped condensation from a window and finally seen the warped landscape outside. I became hyper-aware of every nuance, every interaction. Instead of asking, "Why would they do this to me?" I began studying how. How deep did this plan go? How long had they been weaving their web? What else had I blindly trusted them with? I moved through the days with a careful, practiced calm. I became an expert at hiding my storm, smiling when Jack poured me a cup of coffee, laughing at a story Michelle shared over dinner, feigning ignorance when they exchanged glances that now screamed the language of accomplices, while outwardly playing the role I'd always assumed. Devoted wife, forgiving friend, I quietly retraced their steps, scrutinizing my past for clues I'd missed. The paperwork first gnawed at me during a weekend in March. Jack breezed into the kitchen one morning, holding a stack of envelopes, his expression unreadable. "Hey, Em, could you gather the trust documents from your dad's old file cabinet? I want us to review our assets." Just being thorough. His tone was offhand, distant but persistent. That request had felt odd, too official for breakfast conversation, and far too interested in the details of a house Jack had always called yours. I complied, of course. Why wouldn't I? Our finances had always been open, or so I thought, a partnership seamlessly managed between my creative eye and his steady legal hand. But as I dug out the manila folders from my father's antique cabinet, nostalgia was quickly replaced with unease. On those pages, in my father's careful script, were the deeds and trust papers that ensured our family home would pass to me alone. The house with the sprawling porch, the one place that felt like sanctuary after Dad's passing. What I didn't know then was that Jack had already begun assembling his arsenal. He'd quietly met with a property attorney, the same one who helped my parents draft the original trust. He'd asked the kinds of detailed questions a husband should never have reason to ask. How could a marital home be transferred solely to his name? Could a spouse contest a will posthumously citing undue influence? What loopholes did Massachusetts law allow if an owner was mentally unfit or absentee at the time of title transfer? And, devastatingly, what could be proved with the testimony of a concerned friend. As spring crept in, bringing with it bursts of magnolia and daffodil along our street, Jack and Michelle became a fixture, together and separately, in my routines. Michelle would show up with pastries, just as she'd always done. But now she seemed to linger near the file cabinets in the hall, her attention a little too sharp when we talked about my parents' estate. Jack's late nights at the office grew in number, and their encrypted conversations shifted from the generic warmth of an affair to the sharp, calculated tone of two people plotting an acquisition. One afternoon, I came home early from a site visit and heard muffled voices from Jack's study. I paused, my hand hovering over the doorknob, listening as Michelle's laugh faded into a hushed, almost anxious whisper. She left a few minutes later, her purse clutched tightly. In the kitchen, Jack pretended to be absorbed in a legal brief, his answers clipped and terse when I asked about their meeting. It was a series of small inconsistencies that finally gave away the bigger picture: payments from our joint account to a private notary service in downtown Boston. Just taking care of some contract witnesses for a client, Jack said. Calls from Michelle's phone on evenings when Jack wasn't home. Logs erased from the office phone I rarely used. A strange alert from our mortgage company. An automated message thanking me for beginning your refinancing inquiry. I never made that call. I began to conduct my own research. Every evening after the facade of domestic life concluded, dinner cooked, dishes washed, Jack's breathing steady from the next room, I retreated to my laptop, poring over property law articles, prank-calling banks under the guise of Ms. Sullivan, and photographing every document pertaining to the Turner house. I even reached out, covertly and with a trembling hand, to my old law school roommate, Liz, whose stint at a Boston family law firm had given her a cynicism I now found necessary. Patiently, she explained the ways spouses could, under the ruse of protecting shared assets, push transfers, refinance, and coerce witnesses to claim incompetence or mental distress. I listened with a mounting sense of dread. Every scenario she described mirrored, almost verbatim, the conversations Jack and Michelle had shared in their texts. It was my mother who, unknowingly, confirmed the worst. She called one morning, her voice bright as always. "Emily, dear, I just wanted to check. Jack emailed me a few questions about the house deed. He said you needed clarity on your inheritance before refinancing. Is everything okay?" The world seemed to tilt. Jack had spoken directly to my mother about my confusion, laying the groundwork for a story where I, the grieving only child, needed adult supervision in legal affairs. Perhaps the most bitter pill was the methodical nature of their betrayal. This was no impulsive act of passion. It was orchestrated over months, rehearsed and refined. Michelle played the part of loyal friend, validating Jack's lies with casual comments about my overload at work or how M's just been so forgetful lately. At parties, she'd brag about our adventures in college, slyly painting me in stories that focused on my artistic temperament, my supposed penchant for scatterbrained decisions. I can see now that these tales, once harmless anecdotes, became strategic bombs, anything to justify a narrative in which I needed help managing the very legacy I'd protected for years. The final piece of the puzzle arrived in the form of an email, one Jack must have meant to send only to Michelle, but which landed in our shared inbox thanks to autofill, a careless error in a web of otherwise meticulous plotting. The subject was innocuous: follow-up, deed transfer. But the content was knife-sharp. A draft of an affidavit in which Michelle would testify before a notary, claiming that I'd expressed intent, during a particularly difficult week, no doubt, to gift the property to Jack, as a gesture of gratitude for his support. There were even references to old voicemails from me, clumsily edited sound files attached, to be submitted as evidence of my consent. I stared at the screen, my body cold. The legality wasn't just theory anymore. They were setting the stage for a legal coup, gaslighting me in the process. I'd be made to look unstable, forgetful, indebted. The story would go like this: a grieving daughter, unable to manage her own affairs, leans too much on her pragmatic husband. Friends and family concur, citing missed appointments, confusion, stress, all conveniently orchestrated behind my back. Rage and shame collided inside me. How easily I'd handed over trust, first to Jack, whose promises seemed unbreakable, then to Michelle, whose loyalty I'd never questioned. These two had mapped every vulnerability, charted out each weak spot, and were using my own love, grief, and family history as weapons in their campaign. But the more I replayed their moves, the more determined I became to resist the role they'd written for me. I was not the confused, aimless artist they hoped everyone would believe I was. I was my father's daughter, shaped by a fierce sense of justice and a doggedness that had seen me through darker nights than this. Determined to fight back, I started assembling my defense. I documented every interaction, recording conversations where possible, photographing every suspicious document. I transferred digital backups of my father's will and property deeds to a password-protected drive. I cataloged the changes in our banking statements, the notary payments, the emails between Jack and Michelle. At Liz's recommendation, I reached out to a forensic accountant, an unassuming woman named Martha, who, after our first cryptic phone call, assured me that finding paper trails is what I do best. With her help, I began mapping out the timeline of accounts and assets, establishing proof of my mental competence and the history of every major decision made since my father's passing. The work became my refuge. Each new piece of evidence reclaimed a little of what I'd lost. I no longer grieved openly. I strategized. I read legal texts by night, took surreptitious videos during the day, and began, ever so gently, pulling away from Jack and Michelle. It was a delicate balance, acting normal enough to avoid arousing suspicion, yet vigilant enough to catch every slip, every whisper. Meanwhile, Jack's pressure only increased. Late at night, he'd mention the stress I seemed to be under, suggest perhaps I take a sabbatical from work or see a family doctor, just to be sure you're taking care of yourself. Sometimes, Michelle would join in, offering to drive me to appointments, or slyly suggesting I hire an assistant. It was an elaborate gaslight, a slow erosion of my self-confidence, each suggestion backed by fake concern. But I'd already learned their language. I picked my battles, let slip a few minor details, feigned forgetfulness in harmless situations just to placate them. All the while, I documented. Each line of their narrative, I countered with evidence. Letters from clients, trophies from work, clear legal records, and digital timestamps. The shock never truly left me. Grief transformed into purpose, pain into discipline. Sometimes, late at night, when Jack's breathing was even and the lights of Boston twinkled in the distance, I'd hold my father's old watch in my palm, grounding myself in memory. I was not alone. Generations of Turners had built that house, brick by patient brick. If taking down their plot required every ounce of wit and stubborn resolve I possessed, so be it. I wouldn't let them rewrite my story. Not like this. So, as spring wore on and the facade of normalcy shimmered across our lives, I prepared quietly for the reckoning to come. The house, the legacy, the love, the memories would not be surrendered. And when the time was right, not only would I expose their plot, but I'd do it in a way that forced them to answer for every calculated lie, every stolen trust, every disguised cruelty. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing you can take from someone isn't just their home or money, it's the foundation of who they are. And I would show them that I was more than the next victim of their scheme. I was the storm they never saw coming, the cold and calculated revenge plan. For most of my life, I believed kindness was my greatest strength, the gift my parents left me, the virtue I wielded through hard seasons and good ones alike. But in the weeks after uncovering Jack and Michelle's betrayal, I realized that sometimes survival demands something sharper, colder. Kindness alone would not protect me or salvage the dignity they had taken. It was time to wield strategy and discipline, a plan more precise than their own duplicity, and fueled by the kind of steady rage that refuses to burn out. There's a peculiar loneliness to harboring a secret so large it threatens to consume you, especially when its weight is carried in silence. Each day, our home became a carefully staged theater. Breakfasts at the kitchen counter, once moments of easy laughter, became practice in self-control. Michelle's texts would light up my phone, bringing you tomorrow's croissants. Jack would brush a kiss against my cheek, his touch practiced, his "I love you" so casual it sounded almost sincere. No one noticed my restraint, or the way I lingered at the window after they left, cataloging every gesture, every whisper in the hallway behind closed doors. I could not afford the satisfaction of a dramatic confrontation, not yet. My instinct screamed for justice, but reason cautioned patience. To win, I needed to be better than them, smarter, quieter, and backed by evidence so irrefutable, even their best lies would crumble in daylight. For perhaps the first time, I approached my own life the way I approached my design projects, breaking down problems into patterns, identifying the weak points, and building foundations that would hold when the inevitable storm hit. The first step was documentation, obsessive, thorough, meticulous. I kept a leather-bound notebook hidden in the back of my closet, filling it with dates, snippets of overheard conversation, strange bank transactions, and every instance of their orchestrated concern for my mental health. I photographed every relevant document and stored backups on both a cloud drive, under a new, untraceable email address, and an encrypted thumb drive tucked into my makeup bag. The digital evidence, the damning emails, forged voice memos, and their text message history was triangulated on 3 devices, but evidence alone would not be enough. I needed people on my side who possessed the skills and detachment I lacked. That's when I called Martha, the forensic accountant who had already helped me begin tracking the movements of money through our joint accounts. I outlined the situation as plainly as I could, not just financial deception, but a conspiracy between my husband and my best friend to render me incompetent and take my home. Her response was quiet, almost clinical. "Emily, this is high-level gaslighting. You're right to be so careful. We'll need absolute precision." She agreed to keep everything confidential until I signaled it was time to act. Next was Liz, the sharp, dry-witted family law attorney who still owed me a favor from college. She was the only one I allowed a glimpse of my raw panic. Over mugs of burnt office coffee, I whispered details I'd never said aloud. Liz took notes, her eyes narrowed with intent. "You need a log of every interaction," she insisted. "Record everything you can. Their manipulations, the moments they suggest you're unstable, their attempts to involve your mother. The courts look kindly on thoroughness and clearly documented patterns of coercion. From then on, I installed a discreet voice recorder app on my phone, triggering it whenever I sensed a setup brewing. At night, when Jack would lean over the table with feigned concern, "Are you feeling okay, Em? You've seemed so scattered lately. Maybe see Dr. Allen again?" I'd let the recorder run. When Michelle arrived and, between bites of pastry, ventured, "Jack's just worried about you, you know. Ever since your dad passed, it's like you never gave yourself space to heal." I'd hide my shaking hands beneath the table and watch the scene unfold. Each attempt to rewrite my sanity became a brick in my own defense. It wasn't always easy to keep my composure. Some nights, grief and fury would hurl me from sleep. I'd sit on the bathroom floor, scrolling through the mounting evidence, grounding myself in purpose. I built small rituals for survival. Morning runs around the neighborhood before anyone else was up. Silent affirmations in the mirror that I was not crazy, that my memory was whole and my instincts trusted. When friends invited me out, I forced myself to go, practicing the art of the social mask and learning, through subtle questions, what Jack and Michelle had been sewing behind my back. Their campaign, I realized, was twofold. In private, they cultivated doubt and exhaustion, aiming to break me down so I'd make a mistake or lash out, all the easier to paint me as unstable. Publicly, they continued to project the model relationship, Jack as the loving husband, Michelle as the ever-devoted friend who just wanted to help. I played along, with a grim sort of satisfaction, adding each new act to my dossier. But I also started quietly undoing their groundwork, one thread at a time. A crucial part of my plan was financial autonomy. I opened a new account in my name only, rerouted my business payments, subtle at first, then in larger amounts. Quietly, I cut the automatic transfers to our joint savings, creating a paper trail of my independence. With Martha's guidance, I flagged every transfer Jack initiated for scrutiny, so any attempt to mortgage or use my assets as collateral would be met with requests for further verification. She was brilliant at slipping in small legal tripwires, tiny obstacles easily justified by the bank or the law firm, but which would later highlight Jack's unauthorized meddling with my inheritance. Legally, we needed irrefutable proof of intent and conspiracy, not just suspicion or motive. Liz drew up a letter of intent to protect my house from any transfers or refinancing without my direct, notarized approval. I secured my power of attorney, updating it to require dual sign-offs from myself and an independent trustee. Behind the scenes, Martha drafted a timeline of all financial activity since my father's death, mapping every deposit, withdrawal, and coincidental request for legal clarification Jack had made to my mother. But it wasn't enough simply to go on the defensive. I had to turn Michelle and Jack's own tactics against them, feeding them just enough ambiguity that they'd grow careless. I played into their manipulations, pretending to lose track of dates, occasionally acting flustered in conversation. Once, when Jack asked why I forgot our dinner with his colleague, I apologized without protest, smiling weakly. Michelle offered to help organize my calendar, an offer I accepted while switching her reminders to a decoy email I never checked. Meanwhile, I curated what friends and family saw of me. Instead of withdrawing, I became more present, volunteering at charity events my parents had supported, taking my mother out for brunch, engaging old family friends in conversation about the house and its history. I left a digital breadcrumb trail, emails to my attorney, doctor's receipts, and work timelines showing my mental acuity and participation in all matters relating to the estate. It was tedious, exhausting work, proof that I was not only present, but thriving, contrary to the narrative they were spinning. Through Liz, I discovered that Jack and Michelle were planning something grand, a celebration that Michelle mentioned to her hairdresser, whose cousin happened to be Liz's client. The event was described as a fusion of an anniversary party and an intimate recommitment ceremony with carefully selected guests. On the surface, it would appear to honor me and Jack's marriage, a public affirmation of our success. But buried within the guest list were 2 notaries and a witness. Evidence, Liz speculated, that a more sinister legal transaction was planned to coincide with the celebration. It was time to accelerate my plans. Working with Liz and Martha, I arranged for a trusted private investigator, Evan, a former police detective with a penchant for discretion, to document every interaction at our gatherings. He attended as a +1 to a mutual friend, recording conversations, snapping candid photographs of document exchanges, and noting every time Jack or Michelle steered guests away from me. A week before the scheduled celebration, I staged what would later read as an emotional breakdown, canceling a work meeting, claiming exhaustion, and letting Michelle convince me to take the afternoon off. She hovered, all false warmth, while I pretended to nap on the sofa. I watched her from behind half-closed eyes as she rifled through my office drawers, pausing just long enough to breathe a sigh of triumph before snapping photos of my new financial statements. That night, I added timestamps, videos, and her fingerprints on my documents to the growing stack of evidence. The final days before the event were among the hardest of my life. I felt separated from myself, like an actor in a high-stakes drama I hadn't auditioned for, but still somehow understood my role perfectly. My mother called, worried. "You sound distant, Em. You sure everything's all right with Jack?" I lied, with practiced gentleness. Even she, who had known me since birth, could not see the extent of the wall I'd built to keep her safe from the truth, at least until I was ready. The night before the celebration, I gathered the team, Liz, Martha, and Evan, in a quiet booth at a wine bar miles away from Brookline. I laid out the strategy. At the precise moment Jack and Michelle attempted to execute their legal maneuver, I would reveal the compiled evidence, not just to halt the transaction, but to expose the depth of their conspiracy to the assembled witnesses. Liz assured me our evidence would not only stop the fraudulent transfer in its tracks, but provide ample ground for a civil suit, possibly even criminal charges if the forged documents and audio edits could be proven in court. I barely slept. By sunrise, I was more steel than flesh, my hands steady, even as my heart pounded. I replayed every contingency in my head. What if Jack sensed my scheme? What if Michelle caught a glimpse of my notes? Martha called at 7 a.m. just to say, "You're ready. Remember, they think you're broken. That's your edge." The day of the event dawned bright, almost offensively sunny. I dressed with intention. A navy suit, something strong, dignified, a subtle nod to the shutters of my childhood home. Walking into the decorated hall with my mother on my arm, I scanned the faces, friends, family, a scattering of attorneys and notaries mingling near the bar. Jack greeted guests with his trademark charm. Michelle was resplendent in a dress far too grand for a mere anniversary party, her laugh slicing through the room like a spotlight. I played my part, toasted the guests, thanked Michelle for all her help planning, smiled serenely whenever Jack's hand found my back. I watched as the celebrant and 2 legal witnesses slipped away with Jack and Michelle toward the back office. Evan signaled. He was in place, recording every word. When the trap finally sprang, it was almost anticlimactic in its efficiency. The documents Jack pressed before me were not what he claimed. Instead of a simple gift declaration, they included language to surrender my claim to the house altogether. Michelle hovered, pen in hand, murmuring reassurances I'd heard rehearsed a dozen times. I looked at each of them in turn, and then, finally, let the mask slip. Pulling the evidence from my bag, I turned to the witnesses. Before I sign anything, you'll want to hear what's really going on. My voice did not tremble. Jack's face drained of color. Michelle's hands shot to her purse. I handed Liz the audio files, the photographs, the notary records. Martha, calm as ever, presented the financial timeline. Evan's video played out over the speaker, showing Michelle's earlier trespass into my files. An icy hush swept over the room. I felt years of pain condense into one white-hot moment of power. It was over, or rather, it had only just begun. The legal battles would drag on. Jack and Michelle would scramble, lie, threaten, but they couldn't erase my evidence, nor the witnesses who had seen the truth for themselves. The home would remain mine. My legacy, my father's legacy, would remain intact. That evening, alone for the first time in months, I sat on the porch as dusk settled over Brookline. The world was changed. I was changed. But for the first time, I felt the weight of fear lifting. A slow, steady freedom, blooming where bitterness had lived. I realized revenge, at its core, was never about punishment. It was about reclaiming the story they tried to steal and refusing to be erased from my own life. I closed my eyes and let the cool New England air fill my lungs, vowing never to let anyone rewrite who I am or who my family meant to me. Whatever came next, I would meet it head-on my own terms, and with the strength I'd always had, only now, at last, unleashed. The truth is exposed. If I try, I can recall every sight, scent, and sound of that day. The way sunlight filtered in sharp gold through the windows, the scent of fresh lilies Michelle had arranged, the low background hum of carefully curated jazz. It was the kind of afternoon meant for celebration. Instead, it became the crucible where every secret would finally ignite, changing the trajectory of my life, and theirs, forever. The tension was invisible but electric. As guests mingled beneath garlands of pale green eucalyptus and white blossoms, I floated among them, exchanging practiced smiles and polite laughter, acutely aware that every detail, the chilled wine, the polished glasses, the warm hugs, might have been planned as part of a larger deception. My mother lingered at my elbow, gently fussing over my hair, oblivious to the subtext. Thrumming around us, somewhere in the crowd was Liz, subtle as always in a dove-gray dress, her eyes flickering with caution. Evan posed as an old college friend, camera case slung over his shoulder, slipping easily into the eddies of conversation. Martha, too, was there in the crowd, a purposeful distance away, monitoring subtle movements between Jack, Michelle, and the notaries. For hours, I'd steeled myself for what would come next, pressing every raw nerve into resolve, taking in faces, family, lifelong friends, neighbors. I kept thinking how easily the world accepts the surface of things. The guests saw Jack and me as the quintessential couple, a model of resilience and partnership. Michelle, the forever loyal confidant, always ready with a story and a smile. Who would suspect this tableau was constructed on lies, on the cold underside of betrayal and calculated theft? Congratulations, Emily. A friend from the firm squeezed my arm. You and Jack truly built something beautiful here. Cheers to many more years. I wanted to laugh or weep, but instead, I thanked her, steady as stone, knowing the very foundation she admired had been targeted for demolition. It began in subtle ripples. I caught Michelle guiding the notaries toward the home office, her voice soft and businesslike. Jack shadowed her, a hand resting lightly in the small of her back, a gesture so practiced it made my skin crawl. Guests drifted toward the terrace, glasses in hand, perhaps wondering at the sudden disappearance of the hosts. Evan gave a tiny nod, signaling that now was the moment the ceremony would shift into something neither Jack nor Michelle had planned. In the office, the air was heavy with anticipation. Michelle had arranged stacks of paperwork on the polished desk, her handwriting crisp on sticky notes. Sign here, initial, witnesses. Jack stood behind the chair, waiting for me, all lawyerly poise and barely concealed unease. Just a few last details, he said, offering me a pen. Standard paperwork to finalize. Makes things simpler for the accountant. I glanced at Michelle, whose smile was tight, eyes bright with forced encouragement. The notaries, sensing nothing unusual, shuffled in their seats, flipping through their folders with the quiet patience of people used to signatures and silence. This was the pivot, the linchpin of a plan so carefully engineered that it depended on my consent at the last possible moment, a surrender disguised as routine. I felt my heart pounding, steadying myself by recalling everything that had brought me to this point. The sleepless nights, the cataloging of evidence, the whispered encouragements from Liz and Martha, the private resolve honed over months of deception. I took a breath and stepped back from the desk. Time slowed as Jack frowned, confusion flickering. Is something wrong? He asked, his voice a thread too gentle. I picked up the stack of documents, neatly, interleaved between routine financial statements and innocuous home maintenance agreements were 2 pages marked with a subtle tab. Legal surrender of my rights to the house, cloaked in the language of estate planning. I'd like everyone here to listen for a moment, I said, my voice even, ringing in the wood-paneled room. Before any papers are signed, there are things you need to know. Michelle's hand jerked at her lap, knuckles blanching around her phone. Jack's composure fractured almost imperceptibly. Both tried to smile, but the room's oxygen shifted. The notaries exchanged glances, scanning my face, summoning every ounce of calm. I withdrew from my bag the thumb drive and gently placed it on the desk. These files record every conversation, transaction, and message exchanged over the last few months. I invite you to review them before going further. I gestured to Liz, who entered on cue, legal pad in hand, and Martha, who produced meticulously bound ledgers. Evan moved into the corner and began quietly documenting the unfolding scene, his camera lens reflecting the measured horror blooming across Michelle's face. This is highly irregular, Emily, Jack said, his tone sharpening. He tried to collect himself, drawing upright into that familiar legal stance. We can discuss this privately. No, I said, louder now, the tremor in my voice replaced by steel. We do this here, with all witnesses present. One of the notaries, a woman in her 40s, nodded, flipping on her voice recorder. For the record, Ms. Turner, please proceed. With trembling hands, anger, grief, and grim clarity vying for dominance, I distributed copies of the key evidence. Liz read aloud from a timeline. Payments to the notary firm, unauthorized refinancing inquiries, emails between Jack and my mother setting up the guardianship ruse. Martha presented the financial records that mapped the flow of money, showing every suspicious withdrawal, and the paper trail of documents Jack and Michelle engineered to make me appear incompetent. Evan's recordings played for the room. Whispered conversations between Jack and Michelle about the benefits of getting her out of the picture. Michelle's voice coaching Jack to stay patient. She'll give up the house if she thinks it's her own idea. The digital messages flickered across a screen for the notaries. Careful language about forgetting, stress, the opportune moment to file the new deed. Jack's mask cracked. He reached for my elbow, his face pale. "This is a gross mischaracterization," he hissed. "You're upset. Let's talk outside." Liz interrupted, cool as glass. "Mr. Sullivan, please refrain from touching my client. All communication going forward will be monitored and in view of these legal witnesses." There was nowhere left for them to run. Michelle adopted the desperate sweetness of a child, stammering about how none of this was meant to hurt Emily, spinning stories of her concern for my mental health. Her tears seemed rehearsed. Even the notaries, now clearly uncomfortable, recoiled from her attempts at sympathy. Outside the room, the party continued. Music, laughter, the sound of glasses clinking. In the office, the structure of their plot unraveled strand by strand. My mother's face appeared in the doorway, confusion dissolving into alarm. I beckoned her in, holding her hand. "I'm sorry you have to hear this now," I whispered, "but I need you to know the truth." She wept as Liz finished presenting the evidence. The notaries conferred in low voices. Then one declared, "We will not witness any of these documents. This process is void pending legal action." Michelle collapsed on the edge of the desk, her bravado shattered. Jack, once so composed, so certain the world would always believe his version, looked nothing like the man I'd married. He offered apologies as fragile as spun sugar, issuing threats and pleas in the same breath. "We can work this out," he muttered. But even he seemed unconvinced. The aftermath unfolded in waves. Some guests pieced together enough to sense something seismic had happened. Others were told a vague story about family conflict. The legal mechanism was immediate. With the evidence presented in front of professional witnesses, Liz filed an injunction to freeze any transactions on the house, and Martha alerted the bank to suspend suspicious accounts. Jack's reputation fractured almost overnight. The next week, he was placed on leave at his firm, pending review of ethical violations. Michelle, ever the life of the party, found her invitations drying up, her network of support dissipating like smoke. The story spread along lines of loyalty and gossip. Some friends reached out in solidarity, others withdrew, uncertain how to reconcile the persona of happy family with the ugly truth now exposed. I moved through the aftermath in a kind of exhausted trance. Part of me expected to feel elated, vindicated, but in reality, exposure is more draining than satisfying. The cost of truth is steep, reliving every deception in the retelling, absorbing others' shock and pity, facing the practical remains of devastation. I consoled my mother, supported by Liz and Martha, while fending off anxious calls from relatives eager for the whole story. Legal machinery groaned into motion. Lawsuits filed, depositions scheduled, every detail of Jack and Michelle's plot subjected to forensic scrutiny. My days were punctuated by paperwork and meetings, my nights a patchwork of anxious dreams. But there was also a steady, growing sense of reclamation, that my narrative, so thoroughly co-opted by others, was finally back in my hands. Most unexpectedly, support arrived from places I hadn't thought to look. Neighbors I'd barely spoken to sent notes of encouragement. Old clients left, voicemails thanking me for my integrity and offering professional opportunities. My mother, shaken but fierce, became my fiercest ally, volunteering to testify if need be. Liz and Martha, once mere professionals, felt like family. At moments, guilt crept in. Had I been blind? Too trusting? But I reminded myself, as I walked the halls of my house, preserving the memories my father built, that kindness is not a weakness. The true failing belonged to Jack and Michelle, not to the woman who loved too deeply. I learned, too, that victories are not singular moments. They unfurl slowly, like the first blush of dawn after a harrowing storm. Each day, I woke under my own roof. Each time I heard my mother's voice in the kitchen or watched sunlight stretch across the wooden floors my father refinished by hand, I recognized the true weight of what I'd preserved. Not just a home or an inheritance, but my right to self-definition, to dignity and agency. Months later, when the court ruled in my favor, voiding the attempted transfer, enjoining Jack and Michelle from contact or financial interference, I stood with my legal team on the courthouse steps, exhausted but unbroken. No triumph felt louder than the quiet walk I took alone afterward, past the old oaks and porch swings of my childhood. The truth, once exposed, cannot be put back in the box. Yes, I lost two people I loved most in the world, but I reclaimed everything that made me who I am. Jack and Michelle became footnotes in a story I am still writing, their power dissolved in the bright, unflinching light of honesty. I wish I could say the pain disappeared. It didn't, but I also discovered a new steadiness, a sense of freedom that came not from vengeance, but from refusing to live shrouded in anyone else's story. For the first time, perhaps ever, I believed in my own strength, not in spite of what I lost, but because of how fiercely I learned to reclaim it. And so, as I sit on the same old porch, cider steaming in my hands, the ghosts of deception replaced by the honest, quiet company of the self I fought so hard to protect, I know at last, the truth can devastate, but it can also give you back your life, freedom and a new beginning. Freedom, I've learned, is quieter than I expected. It doesn't arrive in a glorious crescendo or the dramatic slamming shut of old doors, but in the softly persistent return of choices, the gradual exhale of tension you didn't realize you'd been holding for years. In the days and weeks after the dust of lawsuits settled and the last traces of Jack and Michelle's deception were scrubbed from every corner of my life, I found myself alone, truly and wholly alone, for the first time in what felt like forever. It was a loneliness that hurt at first, sharp and jarring. My world had been peopled by the two of them for so long that even their absence was a kind of echo, a sound I braced against. At night, the old house seemed to expand and creak in new ways. The guest bedroom, where Michelle once slept, was stripped to bare walls. Jack's study was emptied, its desk cleared of all but dust motes lingering in the slanted morning light. I remember wandering from room to room, like a wary stranger in my own memories, and finding not only traces of grief, but also strange pockets of relief. It was in those solitary hours that the shape of my new life first emerged. The scar of betrayal, still raw, made each step tentative. Mornings began with simple things. The ritual of making coffee just the way I liked it, too strong, with exactly 1 spoon of sugar, lingering over the paper in the sunlit kitchen, greeting my mother on the phone with an affection no longer tinged by secret worry or shame. For years, my identity had been wound up with partnership, playing wife, best friend, dutiful daughter. Now, I was learning to be just Emily again. The odd freedom of that, the sheer potential of choosing only for myself, was both terrifying and thrilling. Therapy helped more than I expected. Vulnerability, which had once made me a target, now became a source of power. I spoke, sometimes haltingly, sometimes in angry torrents, about trust, manipulation, the slow drain of self-doubt I'd lived with for too long. My therapist coaxed me to see not just what I'd survived, but who I'd become in the process, the ways pain had refined a strength that was gentler, deeper, and much harder to break. Work, too, became sanctuary. I poured myself into design projects, bringing new life to clients' homes, and, in the process, finding inspiration for my own. With the encouragement of friends and a few new referrals, their well-meaning emails, always beginning with, "After all you've overcome," I allowed myself to dream again, to imagine restoring old spaces, hosting workshops for young designers, even traveling, just for the delight of seeing a city not haunted by old ghosts. It surprised me how quickly some things came back. I laughed again, sometimes so suddenly I'd startle myself. I found myself singing along to the radio, unburdened by the anxiety of being overheard. Small, everyday victories, assembling bookshelves by myself, painting over the scuff marks by the stairs, eating dinner alone without feeling lack, became totems of self-reliance. I organized a dinner party for a handful of neighbors, their faces warmly expectant as they crossed my threshold, the house now filled with a new kind of laughter. No masks, no secrets. My mother became a new kind of friend, not merely the comforting constant, but an active partner in healing. We started a tradition, Sunday afternoons on the porch, swapping stories over cider, remembering my father's stubborn generosity and the sound of his favorite records. She confessed her own doubts and fears, admitted the guilt she'd felt, not seeing through Jack sooner, and together we let those regrets drift away, replaced by shared gratitude for what we had, kept safe, each other, and the house, and the love that predated any betrayal. The legal aftermath dragged on in the background, but its drama lost power over me. Jack and Michelle faded into the periphery, their names invoked only when paperwork required it. I stopped checking the gossip, blocked their numbers, and realized weeks could pass without a single thought for either of them. They were ghosts, unable to reach me in this new chapter. With every passing day, I allowed myself to want things again. Travel plans pinned to the corkboard, Lisbon in spring, Santa Fe in autumn, a studio carved from the old guest room, brimming with swatches and sketches in the soft light only a north-facing window can offer. New connections, a book club, a yoga class, even a tentative first date arranged by a friend. I laughed off my nervousness, reminding myself there was no timetable for trust, no need to rush forgiveness or affection. All that mattered was the gentle forward motion. There were setbacks, of course, triggers I didn't see coming, a note in Jack's handwriting unearthed from the back of a drawer, Michelle's favorite song playing in a cafe, a sudden flash of memory on a rainy morning. But with each wave of sadness, I found the undertow less powerful. I could stand upright, feet planted in the present, offering myself grace instead of blame. Evenings were my favorite part of this new life. I'd sit on the porch with a journal open in my lap, fireflies just beginning to flicker in the garden, and reflect on how profoundly I'd changed. The quiet was not emptiness after all, but possibility, the chance to fill this house, this life, with people and pursuits chosen wholly by me. I wrote letters I never sent, forgiving old wounds, blessing former joys. I imagined the woman I might become, a little older, a little wiser, infinitely harder to fool, but still, at her core, unbreakably kind. I know now that freedom isn't just escape from the people who wronged you. It's reclamation of the life they tried to diminish, the right to define home, love, and happiness according to your own heart. It's waking up each morning and knowing you will never again settle for anything less than the truth, even when the truth is hard or lonely or demands starting all over. And so, while the scars of betrayal may never vanish completely, they have become markers of my endurance, not emblems of failure. The house Jack and Michelle tried so hard to steal remains where it has always belonged, at the center of my story, filled now with self-respect, hope, and the voices of those who stood by me. For the first time in my adult life, I am no one's background character, no side note or project to be managed. I am not merely surviving. I am living on my terms. This, I think, is the honest victory. Not revenge, not even justice, but the freedom to begin again, without apology, without regret, to reclaim not just my home, but myself. And as the next chapter begins, I know I possess everything I need. The wisdom of hard lessons, the strength of having stood alone, and, most of all, a quietly joyous certainty that my future is, for the first time in a long time, entirely my own.